In this lesson, you guys are going to be learning how to rotate a figure around a point of origin, and that point of origin is 0, 0. So in our first example, we are going to show a rotation of 90 degrees about the origin, again, 0, 0. So let's go ahead. In step 1, we're actually going to physically rotate our paper 90 degrees so we can get an idea of what our triangle will look like once it's been rotated. And here we can see it will fall in this quadrant, so it should end up here. And let's go ahead and figure out how the points moved. So in step 2, we are going to write the directions to get to the new points. So for point A, starting at the origin 0, 0, we notice it traveled 1, 2, 3 to the right, and going down, it traveled 1, 2. So let's go ahead and write that in so we have this for future reference. Okay, so there we have it. A moved 3 to the right and 2 down. Now let's go ahead to point B, and in point B we're going to do the same thing. So it looks like B traveled 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right, and it traveled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down. So let's go ahead and write in 4 to the right and 6 down. Okay, and let's move on to our last point, point C. So let's erase point B and write in or draw in our new directions. So it looks like starting at the origin 0, 0, C moved 1 to the right, and it moved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down. So let's go ahead and write in 1 to the right and 5 down. Okay, so now that we have our directions written in step 2, we're going to use these same directions to plot our new triangle here in step 3. So it says, following the directions from step 2, plot the new points. And remember, we always need to start at the origin when following these directions. So let's start with A. It says it moved 3 to the right, 1, 2, 3, and 2 down, 1, 2. So we know our new point will land here. So let's go ahead and plot it. 3 to the right and 2 down ends up here. And when we label it, we need to note that it's been rotated. So to do that, we're actually going to label it A prime so that we know this is the point after it's been rotated. Now we can move on to point B, and we know it traveled 4 to the right and 6 down. So let's go ahead and count that out. 4 to the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So B prime should land here. So let's go ahead and plot that. So here we have B prime, and let's label it B prime. Now we can move on to our last point, point C, and let's go ahead and see how it traveled. So starting at the point of origin, it traveled 1 to the right, and it traveled 5 down. So it should end up here. So let's go ahead and plot that point. So now that we have our 3 points drawn in and labeled, let's go ahead and connect the dots so that we have our new triangle. Now let's write down the plot points, and when we write these down, we're going to see if there's any relation they have to our original points. See if we can find a pattern. So for point A, we know this is x equals 3 and y equals -2. So let's go ahead and put that in. And for B prime, it looks like we have x is 4 and y is -6. So let's go ahead and put that in. And finally, C prime looks like x is 1 and y is -5. So now that we have our points, let's move to step 4, where it says, looking for patterns, define a rule for clockwise 90-degree rotations. So let's look for a pattern here. Okay, so in our A, our original point was 2, 3, and A prime became 3, -2. So those numbers are very similar. Let's see if a similar thing happens in point B. So we had 6, 4, and it became 4, negative 6. So it's looking like the numbers aren't changing, they're just switching. Same thing in C, we had 5, 1, and now we have 1, 5, negative 5. So maybe our x and our y are switching, but what's happening to the x? Looks like we're getting all our x's turned negative. So they're all the opposite. So let's go ahead and try to write a rule for that. So we know x and y will switch, but we need the opposite of x. And to show the opposite in math, we use a negative sign. So our new points for the prime will be y, negative x. And it's important to think of that negative sign on x, not so much as a negative, but as the opposite. I don't want you to think that it always has to be a positive in the x place and a negative in the y place once you get your prime coordinates. It just means that this needs to become the opposite of whatever x was. So the opposite of positive 2 is negative 2. If x over here was a negative number, let's say we had negative 1, when it switches, it will become positive 1 because the opposite of negative 1 is positive 1. So now we have our rule or pattern we can follow when rotating an object 90 degrees. Let's go ahead to our next example where we will be doing a rotation of 180 degrees about the origin. So you can think of 180-degree rotation as we're rotating it 90 degrees twice. So we know to rotate it 90 degrees, we would turn the paper once to the right, but we need to get to 180, so one more time would have us end up here for 180 degrees. So here in step 1, we can see when we physically rotate it, it does end up here. Now we can use the visual we have here to write down our directions for the new points. So starting at our origin, 0, 0, let's go ahead and see how point A moved. So it looked like it moved 1, 2, 3 to the left, and 1, 2, 3, 4 up. So let's go ahead and write that in. And moving on to point B, let's see how it traveled. Looked like it moved 6 to the left and 1 up. Let's write those in. And finally, point C looks like it moved 2 to the left and 2 up. Now let's use our new directions here to plot our triangle in our new quadrant over here. So we know A is going to travel 3 to the left and 4 up. So starting at our point of origin, let's count 3 to the left, 1, 2, 3, and 4 up, 1, 2, 3, 4. So A prime, since it's been rotated, will land here. So let's go ahead and plot and label A prime. Now let's move on to B. So we know to get B prime, we're going to move 6 to the left and 1 up. So starting at the origin, 6 to the left and 1 up. So we know B prime will be here. Let's go ahead and plot and label that. And moving on to our last point, we know starting at the origin, we'll travel 2 to the left and 2 up. So 2 to the left, 2 up. C prime will end up here. Let's plot and label that one as well. Now we can connect our dots and see our triangle once it's been rotated. Now let's go ahead and plot our points for A prime, B prime, and C prime and see if we can find a pattern or a relationship between the new points. So looking at A prime, we know we go to the left 3, so that would be a negative 3, and we move up 4, so we'd have negative 3, 4. Moving on to B prime, we see that it's at negative 6 for x, and 1 for y. So let's go ahead and write that in. And finally, for c prime, we have -2, 2. Let's go ahead and write that in. Now that we have our points, let's go ahead and see if we can find a pattern. So in A, we had 3, -4. A prime is -3, 4. It's looking like the order is not changing, but something is. Let's see if we can figure it out in B. We have 6, -1, and -6, 1. So same thing, order didn't change, but again, something happened with our positives and our negatives. And then C, we had 2, -2, and then here we still have the same order, but again, our positive and our negative signs switched. So the order isn't changing, we just need to find the opposite value. So for x, we have +3, opposite of +3 is -3. For y, we have -4, opposite of -4 is +4. Same thing happened in point B. We have +6, opposite -6. -1, opposite +1. So we need to find the opposite of both x and y. And remember in math to note that it's the opposite, we use a negative sign. So we know for our pattern, we need to find negative or opposite x, opposite y. So let's go ahead and write that in. So now we have our rule of pattern. So we know to find a rotation of 180 degrees, we will use our points given to us, and we just need to find opposite of x, opposite of y. So moving on to our last example, we're actually going to be changing our rotation direction. So far we've been rotating clockwise, but now in this example, we want to do a rotation that's counterclockwise. So think of the clock, we want to travel to the left. But just note that you should always rotate clockwise unless the directions specifically say counterclockwise. Okay, so to start here in step 1, we want to rotate our paper physically 90 degrees clockwise. So we want to move it here, 1 turn to the left. So we know our triangle, after we rotate it, it will end up here. So let's go ahead and find our directions to our points, starting at the origin 0, 0. Let's see how to get to A. So it looks like we're going to go 5 to the left and 2 down. Let's go ahead and write that in. It looks like starting at the origin, point B moved 1 to the left and about 6 down. So let's go ahead and write 1 left, 6 down. And finally for point C, it's moving 2 to the left and 2 down. Now we can use these directions to plot our rotated triangle in our other graph. So starting at the origin for point A, let's move 5 to the left and 2 down. Let's go ahead and plot and label that A prime. Point B moved 1 to the left and 6 down, so let's go ahead and plot that one and label it B prime. And lastly, point C moved 2 to the left and 2 down, so point C prime will be here. Now let's connect our dots to get our new triangle once it's been rotated. And next we can go into plotting the points for each coordinate. It looks like A prime is at -5, -2. And B prime, it looks like it's at -1, -6. And C prime is at -2, -2. Now let's see if we can find a pattern. So for A, we had -2, 5. And now we have, for A prime, -5, -2. So already I can see the x and the y are switched. It looks like x stays the same. We have -2, -2. But y, it looks like we might need to find the opposite of y. So if we went from +5 to -5. Let's see if that's true for point B. We had -6, 1. So already I can see they're switched. We have -1, -6. And same thing happened to y. We had +1, now we have -1. So let's go ahead and write in our rule that we're switching x and y, so it will be y and x over here, but let's remember that we need opposite of y, so -y, and then x stays the same. And there, now we have our 3 rules or patterns we can follow when rotating figures on the coordinate plane.